Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. Every week, we bring you the stories of people who make the world better. And we think that that's a cool thing because we're part of Rotary International, over 1 million Rotarians and Rotaractors and thousands of clubs around the world. And all of them just a little bit different. Ours is not only online, but asynchronous. And as an asynchronous club, we have the flexibility of connecting with people all over the planet to talk to us about all kinds of cool things that we think might be inspiring. In the inspirational space, we have a great speaker for us tonight. So with us is Vahid Motazedian, whom I met in the Central Valley of California. Vahid actually grew up in a number of different places, Iran, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and Oregon, and became ultimately an engineer working in Silicon Valley until 2015 when he decided, no, my roots are in farming. And that sets the stage for our story. If you want to read the full bio, feel free to scroll up the page at siliconvalleyrotary.com or to pause and scroll down the page on our YouTube channel. But either way, you can get lots of info there, including links to how you can learn more about the work that Vahid does. Vahid, we are excited to have you. Welcome to the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and I hand the mic over to you.
Thank you, Roshan. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. The program or the initiative I'm going to talk about today is the first slide up. Is it good? Okay. We call it Wings of Knowledge, and we consider it to be a youth initiative. And the easiest way to explain it is just to jump right in and to share the story of how this thing emerged. So this initiative emerged back in 2012. So at the time, I lived in San Mateo. I worked for Oracle. Wasn't exactly 100% happy with what I was doing. I was looking for volunteer opportunities, and I had friends south of the Bay Area in Gilroy, in Watsonville, in Gonzales, who were teachers. And so I was trying to find volunteer opportunities with them, and they said, yeah, you could come down, volunteer at a school. You could help kids do projects like service projects that help their community. So me going down to these communities, not knowing a ton about them, the question that I posed to the youth to begin with, and when I say youth, I'm typically talking middle school youth, so grades 6, 7, and 8. The question was, how do we improve our community? And I was expecting them to have the answers, and me as the adult, I was going to be accompanying them and helping them. So they came up with a lot of ideas. They love to paint murals. So down in some of these communities, there's no shortages of old fences with graffitis on them. So they would find an old fence, come up with an idea for a mural, and just, paint these beautiful, colorful pieces of art in their own communities as in an effort to beautify it. Another very popular activity that the youth wanted to do was to feed homeless people. So we'd get together on some weekends, they would make sandwiches, we'd go out to certain parks or maybe under bridges, and we would find individuals who appreciated a meal. Another project idea that was very popular was planting. They wanted to plant trees, they wanted to plant flowers. In this particular picture here, they're planting 2 trees in honor of their friend Raul, who had passed away at the age of 13 from leukemia. And another very popular one was car washes. I mean, to buy paints, to buy trees, to buy flowers, you need money. So they would do car washes in an effort to raise funds to be able to do some of their other activities. And beach cleanups, of course, was a super popular one. I mean, down here in the Monterey County, we're about 15, 20, 30 minutes away from the beach, depending where you live. And they would just love to go to the beach, pick up trash, but also maybe get wet and do some swimming while they're there too, right? So me having worked with them for about a year or so and kind of observing at the time, the program didn't have a whole lot of structure, didn't really consider it to be a program. I considered myself to be a volunteer, but an observation was that these young people, they knew what their communities needed. And so what I could really do to help them was to raise their capacity to implement the solutions that they came up with. So let's say they wanted to paint a mural, to try to figure out somebody who could teach them how to paint. If they wanted to plant flowers, to find somebody who knew something about flowers and could guide us. And again, to build the capacity of the youth was what I set as my own personal goal, still as a volunteer. In 2013, they came up with their first engineering project. And the way this one came about was they actually wanted to have a pottery wheel. They wanted to do pottery. And they didn't have a pottery wheel, so the question was asked, could we build one? That was a fascinating question. So we went to the recycling center, we got some old motors. Even the little kids were able to help out to grind and sand down little pieces of metal. One of the dads, luckily, he knew how to weld, so he welded up some frames for us. And we were able to put this all together with some circuitry, and to actually create a working pottery wheel, which the kids proudly took and showed it to the principal of their middle school. And he was fascinated by it. You see him sitting there in his Boy Scout uniform. He forgot about the Boy Scout meeting he was going to, and he was just playing with this clay and also asking me questions like, who are you? You come down, like, who do you volunteer with? And he was asking because he wanted to know, like, could I come and work with more of his students? So he gave me a proposal. He said, could you come down and work with 2 of our STEM classes? I said, how many kids is that? He said, 60 kids. And I said, no way, that's too many kids to really work with, right? The kinds of activities we do is more small group. So I made a counter proposal to him. I noticed that they had a lot of needs. The resources were very limited in the number of people down there who could do STEM activities. So the idea was that in order to help them to meet that need, we would have to raise up local human resources, like especially maybe young people who didn't have a whole lot to do, who they themselves could be the teacher of these other younger kids. So they loved that idea. So they gave me 20 high school students. And they said, you could train these 20 high school students and they will come and work with our 60 middle school students. So we tried that out in 2015 as a pilot project. So you can see on the right of the picture is the older high school students. On the left is their little middle school kids that they had. And we tried that out as a pilot for a year and worked out really well. The younger kids loved it. They loved the fact that their teachers were more like older mentors, like older friends to them. And they were able to learn in a safe environment from kids that they looked up to. And so in 2016, the district made a proposal to me. They said, why don't you come work for us? And at that point, I kind of wanted to leave the Bay Area. I wanted to go do some other kind of work that I felt was more meaningful. And so I took them up on the offer, but I said, I don't want to come as a teacher. I want to come as like a program coordinator, so we could really have the flexibility to recruit the kids we want to work with and to focus on them. So they said, fine, go talk to all of our 9th graders, take whichever ones you want. So they had about 140 9th graders. We presented to all of them. We took surveys, about 90 of them were interested. We narrowed it down to about 40 that we interviewed. And then the following year, we started with 36 of them. So we broke them up into 4 teams. This is one team. This is the second team, the third, and the 4th team. And so that also coincided with a new type of project that we started. 2016 was the tail end of the last big California drought. And so saving water was on the minds of the kids. So they said, could we come up with a technology that helps our town save water? And another way of asking is, can we come up with something that'll help farmers save water? And so they came up with some ideas, which included building sensors. We talked with some of the parents, we talked with some of the relatives who were already in agriculture, and we said this could be a very viable project. We could build wireless soil moisture sensors. Using some of my background from tech, we could develop the hardware, we could develop the software. And so we started out with that goal in 2016. So the kids learned some basic circuits. They had to learn some basic skills, like how to solder, how to wire things up. They had to learn how to basically assemble these into waterproof, dustproof enclosures. They came up with their own logo, the Don Agua water saving system, which was made in Gonzales. And what it needed was a partner to trial this. So at the end of 2016, we approached a local farm, broccoli grower, Pisoni Farms, wonderful individual, 3rd-generation farmer. He was happy to have the kids come and test out their technology on his ranch. So we took a group of kids. The gentleman in the white t-shirt on the left, he's actually on the school board. He came to help out, to lend a hand. And the kids installed 5 of these soil moisture probes in this field. It's a lot harder to dig in clayey soil than you would think, but we had to dig a 3-foot hole, which means that probe is about a 5-foot probe. About 2 foot sticks out and about 3 feet underground. So the sensors are all below ground and the antenna and the battery are above ground. And the output of those sensors looks something like this. You could see when the soil is fully saturated, the graph goes up. When the soil starts to dry out, the graph comes down. So then the grower, based on the crop, he could choose the point at which he needs to water. Now, of course, technology like this exists, but the thing is that technology like this doesn't exist that is made manufactured locally by youth living in small farming towns in Central California. So that's kind of what's really cool about this project, is the way they've been able to step up and learn what they need to learn and do what they need to do to make this project work. So word started to spread. So Pisoni, this one in Gonzales, was our first farmer. Within a month or two, we had a second farmer, organic lettuce in Gonzales. Shortly afterwards, we had a third farmer. They were growing grapes in Gonzales. And then the fourth farmer was in a neighboring town called Chular. This was, I believe, broccoli also. And then finally, we did celery in Greenfield, which is also close to Gonzales. This was organic peppers in King City. If you guys have heard of Watsonville, they got a ranch there called Gizditch. Fantastic pies there. This is where they grow their raspberries and their blackberries. So we put soil moisture probes where they grow their blackberries. This is Lakeside Organics, again in Watsonville, one of the largest organic growers in America. This is Premier Raspberries, again in Watsonville. This is San Lucas, way, way down at the bottom of Monterey County. And also finally, when we wanted to start working with trees, not just row crops, we had to go to the Central Valley. So this is Wolf Farms in Huron, which was our first Central Valley farm. So when we started it in 2016, we worked in Gonzales with some of the nearby farms. Currently, all of the blue cities, the four blue cities, Gonzales, Huron, Poplar, Arvin, those are where we work with schools to engage their students. And then all of the little black cities, that's where we either work with farms or we hope to work with farms in the future. And in a few of them, we've actually worked with youth too. So that's kind of the spread of this in the years. At that point, I'll kind of leave it open for any questions you might have.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, Vahid, this is fantastic. So go ahead and stop sharing for the moment. We'll come back to any slides that we need as we go. But I want to introduce who we have on the recording. So our president-elect in Sacramento, Mike Kane. Yeah, all right. Good to see you, sir. My name is Rushton. I'm the programs coordinator and the president-elect nominee or something like that. So at any rate, Vahid, we are jazzed to be able to share this with our membership and the friends of the E-Club of Silicon Valley. And so I'll start the questions. Michael will chime in as he is inspired to do so, either in the chat or by unmuting and sharing thoughts. But you've obviously worked with a lot of different folks, right? And so part of the story of Wings of Knowledge is a focus on effective partnerships. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What are things that you learned in the process of getting involved in these activities and in Olinga that allowed that to kind of lead to some of the successes that you're having?
I mean, like you said, without effective partnerships, there's no way this could have been accomplished, right? So you go back to when this started, me coming down as a volunteer. I mean, if you didn't have that school partner, there'd be no easy way of engaging young people, right? So the schools were a huge partner. But once you're in the school, I mean, youth are not going to do whatever you tell them to do. I mean, that's just not their nature, right? So the youth themselves became partners. They showed an interest in this. They showed a passion for improving their own communities. They became partners in the enterprise. Now, these youth, you notice they're young, right? Like they're not going to be able to go on field trips unless if their parents and if their families agree to that. So the families themselves became partners in the enterprise. We could do projects at the school, but could we go do projects at the farms, like actual real farms, actual real industry? Well, not unless if the farmers themselves wanted to be partners, right? Once this is all going, how do you fund all of this? Well, you can't do that without funding partners, right? So we also had foundations who developed an interest in this and they started supporting it, right? And then at some point, you go to a point where you bump shoulders with city managers, with mayors, with city councils. So, I mean, they become partners. You explain this to them, you share it with them. They love the fact that it's all like local teachers, local families, local youth, and they find ways of supporting. And so, yeah, like you said, when we started at the beginning, there was zero visibility into what this was going to become, how it was going to look. But that's the actual advantage because it gave space for it to emerge naturally and organically versus one individual having a 10-year vision that they're trying to impose on a lot of different people. So yeah, effective partnership has been key to how this has unfolded and how the structures have developed over time.
Well, clearly, one of the reasons that people get involved is because the story is a good one, and so I like that you framed your presentation as a story. And there are a lot of visuals that come into play in terms of how you get people engaged in a story. Mike asks that you notice that many of the kids pictured are girls. How is it that how is the program promoted within schools, and is it working to attract girls specifically, or is that just naturally kind of what happens?
That seemed to, so it's a good question. Like let's say if you go to a classroom, you go to a classroom of all seventh graders, if you pose to them a question, you're like, who wants to build robots and connect wires and play with motors? A lot of guys are going to raise their hands, right? If you go to a classroom and if you say, who wants to go out and help their community, who wants to go mentor younger kids, a lot of the young ladies are going to raise their hands. And if you look at the stats for teachers in America, I think it's something like 70–80% of teachers in public schools are female. So the fact that you see a lot of young ladies in this is because there's two lines of action they have. One is not only building the tech and doing the projects, but also serving as mentors to younger kids. So I think that's what's been a draw for a lot of the females who are in the program.
It makes a lot of sense. And also when you think about serving the community, you think about partners in terms of service clubs. So we're a Rotary Club, but there's Lions and Optimist and Kiwanis and Seroptimus out there. I mean, loads and loads of good folks. Have you found them to be some of the partners that you've worked with in some of these projects?
Yeah, huge. And it depends a lot on the school district on how strong Rotary is. So for example, when we worked in Watsonville, Rotary was very strong in Watsonville, and that's because their assistant superintendent, Murray Scheckman, he was a Rotarian in the Watsonville chapter. The assistant principal of the high school, Ron Sandage, he was a Rotarian. And briefly myself, I was a Rotarian in the Freedom chapter over there in the Watsonville area. So yeah, where you see a strong presence from Rotary kids have been very involved in this and working. And then you go to other schools where that is not so strong. So then, their involvement in actual service may not be as strong. They may just go to lunchtime meetings, but maybe not get as involved in the community. So it just depends on the adult leadership.
Makes sense. And as you might guess, we're going to have a candidate club for you should you decide that getting back into Rotary is a good idea. But staying with the story for a minute, like one of the really powerful things that struck me about it is that you're asking the kids what they want to do. Like you said, they know what their communities need, and you're really empowering them to ask what they can make happen, right? And so is there anything within the process of getting going that gets them away from tell us what to do so we can have done something nice versus we can explore and figure out how to make something nice happen?
Yeah, and what you said is exactly true. I think when the young people are with an adult, especially maybe an adult that they just met, their tendency is always just to wait and see what that adult is going to tell them to do, right? So yeah, the first time I meet a group of kids, it'll be like, what should we do? And they'll just kind of give you these blank looks. It's like, well, what do you want us to do? It's like, no, that wasn't the question. What do you think we should do? And it's just surprising. A lot of them, even at an older age, it's almost like they've never been asked that question. An adult has never really, truly, genuinely asked them, what do you think we should do? So then in a lot of those cases, you'll have to invest the time to kind of help them overcome that. So, I'll resist the tendency to tell them, here's the projects we could do. And we say, okay, well, why don't we walk around town? Let's take a notepad. Let's walk around the 5 blocks around the school, and let's just write down every single thing that you think could possibly be a project. So you have to be kind of very deliberate in empowering them, and sometimes very patient, and knowing that you're working against a lot of forces that they've been exposed to for years and years and years before you finally met them, right? And you're trying to empower them.
Absolutely. Mike follows up on that idea, asking about, does that empower them to begin thinking differently about their futures, or whether that's college or potential careers or anything like that? Is that something you've seen in your interaction with the kids?
Yeah, that's huge. And so the place where we've done the program the longest is Watsonville and Gonzales. So in Watsonville, some of the kids we've worked with are now 23, 24, 25. In Gonzales, some of them are 21, 22. And then, some of them I keep in touch with, some of them I don't, but like sometimes you'll run into somebody who's like, oh my God, yeah, I work for the cable company now and I do deployments. And remember back when we did the soldering, I really figured out that's what I like to do. And remember when we did the programming, I didn't like the programming at all. So like for them too, what we try to do is expose them to as much stuff possible, knowing that a lot of it maybe they won't like or they'll partially like, but the whole idea is like you don't know that until you've been exposed to 10 different things. And then you find that one thing to say, oh, this is really interesting to me, and I think I may be good at it. So yeah, that does happen over time. That they, as a function of having been exposed to a lot of different things, they figure out what they're good at, what they like, what they want to contribute.
So there's obviously a lot of cool stories that come from the individuals that you work with. Is there any particular kid whose story is a good one to share in terms of just how some of these things played out, perhaps not as you expected, but better, something along those lines?
Um, I'm trying to narrow it down.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah.
I, I think I think there was a lot of surprising moments for me, right? Like you kind of have your stereotypical assumptions about people. So here's like an example. In Gonzales, I remember when we were going to start programming, right? And there was these two guys they were just so good at math. They were so good at science. They just like the way they spoke and everything was amazing. I just naturally had assumed that these guys would be great programmers, right? And so we just started doing some of the programming, and kind of they were trudging through it. You could tell they were not super interested in it. They were doing because it was part of the project for the day. And then off in the corner of the room was this young lady. Her name was Veronica, and she had always told me she wanted to be a vet. She said, "I love animals. I have like 5 dogs. However, I want to be a vet." And she was listening to all of this stuff. And at some point, she came and said, "Can I try it too?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course." So here's a workstation. Sit down. So she sat down at the workstation. She's like, "What am I supposed to do?" I'm like, "Okay, you're using HTML to make this little hello world thing, right?" And I kind of went back to working with the guys. And then within 15 minutes, she's like, okay, I did it. What should I do now? I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, now add this little JavaScript thing. She went off and she did it and comes back 30 minutes. Okay, I did it. What do I do now? And kind of suddenly your eyes start to open little by little, like, oh my God, this lady's really good at this, right? So then her and then another young lady too, which again, it was just assumptions. I didn't assume that they wanted to be anything but vets. But when they were exposed to this, they turned out to be extremely talented at it. So I know that she said when she was going to go to college, she was going to pursue programming. I haven't been in touch with her in a year or two to know how that turned out. But I would say that's like one of the moments where, a kid gets exposed to something, they discover what they're good at.
Well, one of the things about that experience is that in smaller rural communities, they may not have exposure to a lot of possibilities to begin thinking more broadly about this or that, or they do and don't have people to talk to about it, right, and to try
Yeah.
things out.
Yeah.
But in thinking about this, one of the powerful pieces of your story is that this is happening in kind of smaller communities, places where it's a very different economy than here in the Bay Area for sure, right?
Mhm.
What are the things? This is a great question coming from Mike in the chat, right? What are some of the things that will allow you to scale this? So there's so many different facets to the program you do. There's a social curriculum,
Mhm.
kind of programs, mentoring, all of this.
Mhm.
What will allow it to grow and expand to more, not just more communities in California, but
Mhm.
perhaps, allow others to take the model that you've got and to try it out in their own areas as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I think first of all, like maybe the question of why specifically some of these small towns so far off the grid in some ways, right? So when I started this, and we were working in Watsonville, which is kind of actually a little bit of a larger town, and in Gilroy, I mean, not totally a big town, but not also a small town. I was also trying this out in San Mateo at the same time where I lived, right? And it was interesting. You would see that when you would try to engage the kids in San Mateo, I mean, they may like what you're doing, but the thing is, they're probably also on some sport. They're probably also doing piano lessons. They're probably also doing some kind of after school tutoring to get better scores on the SAT, God knows what. They were just doing so much stuff, right? And then the further you drove and you would get to these towns where there's not even a Boys and Girls Club, there's not even a YMCA, and you just drive into a neighborhood and literally like 10 kids would run up to your car. They're like, what are we doing today, right? So it also, one of the things that allowed it to grow and scale in those areas was there wasn't a whole lot of other things to do, right? Kids wanted to be a part of something, but there wasn't a whole lot that they could do. And the fact that when we began, there wasn't like oodles of funding to be able to hire all these program coordinators, but instead we had to look at the older youth to say, hey, the only way this can grow and scale in your town is if yourself kind of like can step up and be mini program coordinator interns to make this possible for the younger kids, right? And so the way it developed was the structures were formed in places that had very little resources, but the kids had a lot of time and a lot of willingness, right? Um, so that's incorporated into the structure of it, like we don't work with classes, but we work with teams of youth, a team being like 6 or so middle school youth, right? That team doesn't have a teacher, but they have a mentor. That mentor themselves being like a high school or a college kid who they themselves went through the program. So it's not only something that they enjoy doing, but they themselves benefited from it when they were young. So they really believe in it. They're like, I had this positive experience, and now I want to give that positive experience to a younger person, right? So you had to make do and develop these structures, which took a lot of time. But I feel like it's able to scale now because the monetary needs, the material needs are very modest compared to some other program where you come into town like, okay, we want to rent our own place. We want to have our own full-time staff. It's like, we don't need to do that. We could go into the smallest town. They all have public schools where they have a school nearby. And these schools have NT classrooms and they have superintendents who are getting no love from nonprofits or from the world in general because all the programs are focused in San Jose or Oakland or San Francisco or Fresno or Bakersfield, right? So the equation just really allows for that type of scaling. And we've kind of been holding the scaling back because we've also been trying to ensure the quality of the program. We don't want to just scale that out of control, right? And we found that the best way to raise up those resources in a town is to spend 3 or 4 or 5 years nurturing middle school youth until they themselves get to high school. And then they become really effective interns at that point. So kind of that point where you could have local human resources in a town, maybe somewhere between 3 to 5 years, right? It's an initial upfront investment.
Wow. Well, Vahid, I got another half dozen questions that I'm going to ask after we finish doing the recording. But in terms of kind of time frame, I'll wind it down now and hand it back to you in a minute for a final word. But to all of you who have joined us, thank you very much. We love that you would choose to spend some of your time with us. These stories that we get a chance to share by people who really believe in sustainable, innovative approaches to improving, communities locally, globally, digitally. These are stories we just love to share. If you are on our Rotary page, our Silicon Valley Rotary.com page, or a page you can ultimately get to via Rotary.cool, thank you very much, then by all means, let us know you were there. There's a little place for the attendance. And at the very bottom, there's a forum, the Discuss, DISQUS forum, for you to leave thoughts, right? What did you think of the presentation or other elements of the, of the meeting? We would love to hear from you. If you're on our YouTube page, leave a comment, right? This is one of the ways that in an online and asynchronous club, we engage with the world. As we always like to do, we hand it back to our speaker for the final word. So Vahid, I hand it back to you. What would you like people to have clearly in mind as they step away from watching the video?
Well, I mean, first, I want to thank you for your time to invite me to the club meeting. It has been a pleasure meeting you personally, working together with you and Kalinga here on Unified. I'm looking forward to doing more good stuff over there. And just maybe as a parting word, I would just say that I feel extremely fortunate. I mean, from a very young age, I knew that I love science and I love technology. But when I started working for tech right out of school, after I got my engineering degree, the companies I work for, I just felt like however many different companies I went with, I never shared their mission, their purpose, their vision for how tech was supposed to help the world. So as an individual, I feel very fortunate that sometime in my life, before I leave this planet, I was able to do some work, even if it's only for a few years, where I feel like I can use technology to truly benefit communities. And I know not everybody has that opportunity to do work that they love, but the kind of work I do, I don't have to say, thank God it's Friday. I don't have to hate Mondays. I love what I do. So I'm thankful for that.
That's awesome. Well, everyone, we will see you next week.